Black Star Gnosis is the latest full-length album from Demoncy, a certain underground fixture in United States black metal since 1989, and one that has some fables and some stories that come along with it that are pretty interesting if you're interested in that. But if we're looking for where the original zeitgeist of black metal came from in the United States, that wasn't so squarely related to the Norwegian side of things or even the Swedish side of things. We find that Demoncy was one of just three or four pretty important figures that define that sound early on. And now I say this is the latest album from the band because there is some debate whether or not Faustian Dawn pertains to whether it's a full-length album or not. I would say not, but otherwise, the thing that you want to get into here, the reason to sort of follow through with this band and check out all their work, even though some of it might be very lo-fi and kind of off-putting at times, is the development of this band within the early 90s was profound. And actually reading the lyrics and kind of getting back into this group over the time, you find that there were a lot of very astute and interesting things done with this group early in those demos that resulted in a pretty confusing early discography because, you know, their first album was probably I think it was the second that they recorded, and their second album was put out in 1999, right after the first one, which was recorded in 1997, and the second record was recorded back in 1995. So there was a brutal regression that happened when you discovered this band around the 2000s, probably early 2000s, where you might have liked the sound of their first album, but the second one went dark and primitive, and then when you found the reissue of Faustian Dawn, you felt like it was the precursor to the second album. So all of that made sense in hindsight, and now that we have that clarity and can sort of appreciate what this band had accomplished early on, you find that their signature sound and the one that everyone wants really relates to Joined in Darkness, which was technically their second album, but it was recorded in between a series of demos around 1995. And that's kind of where this album kind of picks up in terms of its intent. Now, there are records in the 2000s and the 2010s that were released that certainly had to do with this sound and that vocalization. And I'd want to emphasize the fact that Enthroned in the Night is a good album, and we shouldn't necessarily overlook that on the path to this one 10 years later. But this record notably does want to sound a bit more like Joined in Darkness. So we'll cut right to that and catch a clip of that before we move on. So the environment that Demoncy creates is both freeform in its ambiance and these long extended pieces which depict, growling beasts and, very stark scenes and scenery, and to these very controlled or tornadoes of riff and rhythm. And that is a mode of songwriting that the main component of the band, Xithra, has been in charge of for quite a long time. It's sort of always been the strength of the band and at their most focused in terms of riff-oriented songwriting. So these are very rhythmic, hypnotizing movements that change with a lot of sense and a lot of tact. And that's the main reason to return to those 90s demos, is to see where he'd led and where he'd let others lead, and you sort of get a sense for where his guitar style comes from, and it really dominates this record in terms of the six main guitar-driven pieces that are here. Now, in total, there's something like 20-something minutes of black metal and guitar music here, and the rest are kind of extended dark ambient scenery. And in a sense, that's pretty normal for this group, going back to several of their records in the past. Well, that might be off-putting for someone who is new to this, especially if you jump into their EP, which is coming up in a couple of weeks, which features even more of the dark ambient style. So we won't get there right away, but this is well in keeping with the style that Xithra brings to Profane Grace. So if you're a fan and you go back to like 1992 and you listen to those early records from Profane Grace, that dark ambiance, the growling, all of that, it has consistency with what he's presenting today on this record. So in that sense, it's to be expected, but it also dominates the record about less than half the time, and that might be a lot for some people, I guess. For me, it created space between these songs. It gave them a little bit more room to breathe. It gave a little bit of time to process the sort of involved melodies and brutal pacing of it all. And I think appreciate that this was an authentic Demoncy record. And ultimately, if you're prone to sort of geek out about that kind of thing, I think that's exactly what someone would have wanted from this band at this point. I think that I'm enough of a fan where I appreciate it. I really like their 2012 album. That was kind of my point of, kind of my hinge point of becoming a fan. And this delivers on an older, I would say, more stripped down sound in a lot of ways. But I think that's what most people would want. It's kind of the identity of the band really distilled into one potent record, and it goes by without any real hitches here. It's not too long, it's not too involved, but they really hit you with the best of what Demoncy is all about. And to me, that was worth giving a high recommendation to as one of the more interesting and creative records of early December. So go ahead and check out my review for more thoughts, and go ahead and listen to the album whenever you feel like it. It is out now.